Welcome to the discussion. My guest today is Sean Frazier, the Federal Chief Security Officer at Okta. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here, Jason. Always good to see you.
Let me set just a little context for our discussion today. Agencies are modernizing their infrastructures at an incredible pace, especially over the last 9 months. And it's clear identity management, especially through cloud services, has been a key to that success. But like with anything, agencies can't rest on their laurels. They have to be innovative and continue to create an identity-centric model for their applications, their services, and their mission areas. So how do they do that? Well, Sean, that's where you come in. You're going to tell us how they can get through this and do it with innovation and security. Sean is the Federal Chief Security Officer at Okta. Sean, let me start with something that's maybe in the weeds for some of us, but IL4, this is something that across DOD is very important, but it's also, even if a civilian agency is not into the quote unquote IL4, it's a high level of security that they have to care about. So we'll start with a definition. Why do we care about this? Why is it important? And what does it mean?
So IL4 means impact level 4. And what that means is it means a higher number of security controls that we as cloud security or cloud service providers, CSPs, have to pay attention to. So a lot of us in the cloud space start off with IL2 moderate because that's a good place to start. And there's about 300 plus controls that we've got to pay attention to. And then IL4 adds a certain number of controls on top of that for organizations and agencies who are more security focused and security conscious. And then if you look at kind of the impact levels of FedRAMP, they move up to IL5 and IL6. But IL4 is really kind of the meat and potatoes for the DoD community in order to deliver services to the armed services, basically DISA and all the other commands.
And one of the things that we're seeing is a better understanding of when IL4 or those more security controls are needed. It's an understanding of risk, if you will. And I think that conversation has really come to light, especially over the last 9 months. Hey, do we really need that to be that secure, or can we still have rigor, but we don't need as much security? Why is IL4 important today? And why are we talking about it more than maybe previously?
I think one of the reasons is, there are a lot more agencies that are looking to move to a modernized cloud platform. So the more you have kind of security conscious agencies that are looking to do that, the higher level of controls is more important to them. So I always like to tell people, we've been talking about doing cloud and innovation for years, and actually probably over a decade. But it's kind of the horse has to pull the cart. And what we've seen over the last year is that the horse that's pulling the cart is the need to modernize cloud services to deliver across all kinds of use cases, which might be extreme telework. And extreme telework hits us all. It's not just civilian agencies, but it's also Department of Defense agencies as well. So as we look at kind of the use cases driving modernization and forcing us to modernize, we're looking at those higher level of controls that we have to pay attention to. So we're looking at folks like Okta to be able to deliver our services and capabilities at those higher level of controls. But you bring up a great point. Everything's a risk-based decision, right? So there's nothing that's kind of a set in the ground, set in stone thing for delivering security. Every agency has to look at the risk, has to look at the services and the applications they're delivering and model those based upon that risk-based activity.
One of the key pieces when we talk about IL4 is the identity piece, and that's obviously an area Okta plays very deep into. Walk me through what's required from an identity perspective when we talk IL4.
So I think the main thing is pay attention to the basics of security around the controls. So that's kind of the most basic fundamental aspects of what you're paying attention to. And yeah, almost every kind of risk-based access decision starts with identity and access management, because you really can't deliver anything until somebody is requesting something or until something is requesting something. And that's the space that we live in. So the fundamentals of being able to deliver that capability at the IL4 control level is certainly very important for these agencies. And I always like to think of it as identity and access management is kind of one blade of what we do. But if you think about it, from a holistic perspective, we're more like an identity-centric trust platform. So when you start thinking about delivering access, it has to be kind of contextual. It has to be adaptive, so that depending on the use case, depending on the user and the application, you can make different risk decisions at the time of need.
And it also comes back to the risk decision also falls into when we talk about identity. Well, Sean should have access to this document or this system or this network, but he can just see it. It's the roles and responsibilities piece versus Sean can see it and change things. And that's also playing into this, gets us into this IL4 and above, where agencies need to, okay, for Jason to work at home, he should be able to see this database, but he shouldn't be able to change anything in it. Is that the conversation you're starting to have with agencies about roles and responsibilities and identity?
It is, and it's actually built upon kind of layers of discussions we've had over years. So least privilege, roles-based access control, adaptive access control, because there might be an example where, Jason doesn't need to modify this database unless he's in a certain period of time where he has access where he needs to add his input. So we have to be able to take context into effect and be able to deliver that in an automated fashion. So we can't have people behind the scenes saying, okay, I give you the access now and I'm taking the access away, because what if I forget to take that access away? Someone comes in, pretends to be you, and all of a sudden can manipulate that database. So we need that to be automated. We need that to be kind of delivered in a least privilege way, so that way, if there's a point in time where you need to be able to do editing of data, we deliver it to you only when you need it, and we take it away when you don't.
And I was going to ask that question. It can be set up that Sean has access to this database from Monday at noon till Tuesday at 8 a.m. And beyond that, it will cut you off. That's possible, right?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we need to be able to deliver that, and we need to make that assessment every single time. So it's not something we're going to put, again, because this is where we get in trouble in the security realm, where we put a stake in the ground, say it's always going to be this way. And the attackers take advantage of that and say, oh, okay, well, Jason always has access to manipulate this database. I just got to act like I'm Jason and I get access to this database. So the concept of least privilege, or what I like to refer to as kind of the zero trust model, is that we're making that determination every single time you come in. Are you still Jason? Are you still accessing from a device that we trust? Are you coming in from a place that we trust or not? And then make that kind of adaptive decision in real time.
I think that's the other key to piece of this: the device and the place that we trust. Because again, you're looking for, and we'll get into zero trust in a minute. I don't want to go over that point, but I think the point that I think is important that you made is trust. It's the trust but verify model that's really grown over the last, what I would say, 18 months or so, but then the last 9 months has really come in. When we talk about trust but verify, that also leads down the path to better modernization, more innovation across the agencies, doesn't it?
I actually would change it a little bit. I wouldn't call it trust but verify. I would say never trust, always verify, right? Because the trust but verify piece is like, well, inherently I'm just going to trust you unless I figure out I don't trust you. And we're kind of flipping that on its head a little bit to say, I don't necessarily trust you at all until you prove these things. You go through these gates. Your device has gone through these gates. You as an individual has gone through with multi-factor authentication, or you've used your CAC to log into something. Once I've determined that request is trustworthy, and I'm doing that every single time, then you get access. Once the access is done, I tear that all down. So next time you come in, I put you through the same steps that you need to go through to do authentication, which brings up my other big point. The thing I always like to talk about is it's a balance between usability and security. We don't want to punish the user and make it super hard for them to get access to things, but we need to make it harder for the attackers.
So, Sean, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you for a second. It sounds like you are sacrificing usability for security, because I'm every time I come in, I have to prove myself. You don't trust me? I'm your employee. Come on. Why don't you trust me?
This is why we leverage the platform-based technologies that make it easy. Apple has done this at scale. I always like to, I'm a big Apple fanboy, so I always like to kind of pick on Apple. But Apple's done this at scale with Touch ID and Face ID. Every time I log into my device, I've got to prove who I am with my face. But it happens very simply just by me looking at the device. A couple seconds later, even less than a couple seconds later, I've got access to all my applications. So the balance is leveraging, easy to use, user-focused technologies that strengthen the ability for us to apply that every single time.
So you brought up Apple. Now you're going to make all the agencies feel bad because they're going to say, well, we're not Apple, obviously. Are you starting to see some of this in the government already? I mean, we know that the CAC card and the PIV cards have been used for years, and over the last, really since the OPM hack, have really been improved upon for identity and access management. But are they going one step further beyond the CAC or the PIV?
They are. And a lot of agencies have been looking at this and looking at adapting these modernized technologies. And you don't have to be Apple to recognize there's some really great off-the-shelf technologies that you can leverage as a government agency to be able to deliver your mission in a seamless way for your end users. Because That's one of the things, and one of the, if you look at kind of why people go work for private sector companies versus public sector organizations, a lot of it is that technology. They're kind of best of breed technology they get to use. They might get to bring their own device in and use Face ID or leverage these stronger technologies, but make it super easy for them to use. So agencies have been looking to kind of adopt that model for years. I think that's starting to accelerate now, especially when it's tied into cloud infrastructure. So when you think about innovation, innovation is really a conversation between kind of the workload of the application being delivered on the cloud and that kind of end user commercial off the shelf technology like an Apple or a Google or a Windows Hello from Microsoft that allows users to get the job done quickly and efficiently.
And what about the government person who says, well, we're much bigger than you using your iPhone, or, our network is much more complicated. We have, we don't have a lot in the cloud, or we only have 20% of our applications in the cloud. This also works on-prem. I mean, there's a data center piece to it. This is not just cloud, though. That's where agencies seem to be going.
Yeah, and it's an evolution, right? There are a lot of agencies, even in the private sector, a lot of organizations that kind of standardize on diversity, right? When it comes to technology, they got a lot of legacy, they own a lot of data centers. So you look at kind of what steps can I make to modernize, and identity is a great place to start, because identity, especially if you're looking at kind of the, an identity cloud infrastructure, which is exactly what we do. You can start there and leverage that to protect your on-prem resources, but also kind of use that as kind of the eye towards the future, which is, hey, if I'm making a decision about an application, I'm doing my kind of cloud smart or cloud first decisioning. And it ends up being in the cloud. More often, I'm going to make a cloud decision. I want that platform to be able to provide an umbrella technology across all the things, the legacy I'm supporting now, but also where I'm planning on going.
And I think that's one thing that the government sometimes gets a bad rap for. They don't necessarily be able to look past what's in front of them. We need to fix this problem today. Well, will that cause you more problems in the future? And I think that's something that I'll point out with the PIV and the CAC. They had this problem identification. Okay, well, how's that going to work 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now? And here we are about 16 years later after HSPD 12, and things are just starting to get figured out. Are there agencies that you're seeing that are ahead of the curve?
There are, yeah, and I think a lot of agencies that had kind of bought into the philosophy of modernizing, and whether that be kind of cloud or modernizing their identity platforms in the beginning of 2020 were a lot better off by the end of 2020 or the middle of 2020 as they went through kind of the extreme telework or extreme workforce situation they were dealing with. So those agencies that were more innovative had a little easier time. Those who were not, a little bit of a harder time. But I still think there's opportunity to improve. And you're right, you think at HSPD 12 and 14, 15, 17 years we've been living with this. It was the best technology to put in place at the time. But we're a long way from that now. So we need to look to be able to leverage that, because we made large investments there, but that's not the future. That's the past.
Sean, I want to tag back around to the beginning of the discussion, because the focus here is the Defense Department. And there's one, as I've been watching different events and talking to DOD folks, they're definitely on a fast track. Comply to Connect is one example. There's also the identity piece when they talk about biometrics. Is the DOD, in your opinion, further ahead of most agencies, or are they, again, pockets here and pockets there, but they have the same struggles as everyone else?
So I think in some ways they're ahead. They're ahead in the understanding of the philosophy. So you mentioned Comply to Connect. That was a more of a network-centric way to get access to things. I look at it as more as comply to access or comply to authentication now, as we're starting to think about delivering services and functionality from the cloud versus on-prem. But the philosophies and the concepts of least privilege and zero trust security are part of DOD DNA. If you talk to anybody who's worked in IT and security and DOD for years, that part of the kind of understanding of the security architecture is already there. So they're really ahead on understanding. Where they're struggling, just like everybody else, is they have a lot of legacy infrastructure. So they've got a lot of stuff where they got to go back and kind of do inventories of applications I care about, inventories of the data I care about. Inventories of users tend to be a little bit easier because you have kind of a repository that you keep around those users for authentication and access management. But there's still some plumbing work to be done with regards to implementing the philosophy that they already well understand.
All right. I think one of those philosophy points that they're starting to understand is zero trust, and we're going to get to that in the next segment. Sean, let's take a quick break. You're listening to the discussion Accelerating DoD Missions with Identity and Access Management, sponsored by Okta on Federal News Network.